When we are going into our race start for dinghies, and especially for high school sailing, it's done with the sound signal starting system, and so that counts down on a 3-minute timer. And so it's all whistles that they're blowing. So they blow either a long blast or a short blast, and we can basically imagine that the long is 1 minute and the short is 10 seconds. So the first sound you'll hear, usually they'll just do like beep, 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 kind of get everybody's attention so they're listening. But the first official sound you'll hear is 3 long whistle blasts, and that's our 3-minute warning till our start. When we're in this start sequence, we want to be hanging around near the starting line, which is going to be usually depicted by an anchored motorboat and a buoy. Typically, you're always going to have the anchored committee boat or race committee boat is going to be on the right side of the line as you look upwind, and the buoy, or we call it the pin, is going to be on the left side of the line looking upwind. So we draw this imaginary line, a straight one, not jagged the way I did here. And that's our starting line. We can't, if we cross it too early, then we've got to go back and restart once they blow the final start whistle, right? So during the start sequence, we can sail wherever we want. We can go anywhere. But as they blow the final long go whistle, we have to be on the leeward side of the line. If we're over the line at the whistle, that's when we have to go back and restart. So until then, we can go wherever we want. But we have different places that we want to go depending on what we're trying to do before our start sequence, because we don't want to just sit there. We want to be gathering information and finding a good spot. So we've got our boat. They usually have a little orange flag so you can tell exactly what part of the boat is the line. So we can see here, if we take the entire boat, this is like a zone rather than a line. So they'll have a little flag so you can tell this is the actual piece of the line. All right, so our whistle sequence, 3 long, then the next one, you don't hear anything for a minute. Then at 2 minutes until the start, we have 2 long whistles. And then at 1:30, we have 1 long, 3 shorts. And then at a minute, we have 1 long. And then once we get to 30 seconds, then we get 10 seconds warning. So we get 30 seconds, that's 3 shorts. So again, saying each short whistle is 10 seconds. So even if you forget where you were, you just listen. And each of these, you can see each of these signals is different than any other. So 30 seconds, 20 seconds, 10 seconds. And then finally we just get to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then go. So that's that's going on in the background while we're waiting for those 3 minutes to happen. So what do we do during that time? And often we just kind of think, or as beginner sailors, we often just kind of think that's the time that we kind of have to, waste before the race starts. So we just kind of got to wait around. But we can actually do a lot in 3 minutes. And if we take the little bit of time before that as well, we can have more than just 3 minutes. We can have plenty of time. So whether that's in between 2 races, and so maybe there's a couple minutes plus that 3, so maybe we have 5 minutes, or maybe it's the first race of the day, and so we get out there 10 minutes early, and now we've got 15 minutes to work with. But we know we always have at least these 3 minutes to do things before the start. So I keep saying that phrase. What does that mean? What do we need to do before the start? So one thing that we can look at is what is the wind and current conditions like. So a lot of this we can figure out on the shore before we go out, or while we're watching previous races, or while we've been in previous races. But we want to make sure we know what's the wind like. Is it very steady and it's been constantly coming down and just the same all over? Or is it sometimes shifty? Is it sometimes coming from a little bit left and then swinging around to the right? And if it is shifty, is that only happening every once in a while, or is it pretty steady? And if it is shifty, is it very big shifts, or is it just little ones? So a lot of that is not stuff we are going to actually pick up in this 3 minutes. This is going to be stuff that we're getting throughout the day as we're watching the other races that our teammates are in, or the race that we just did 5 minutes ago. That amount of time is where we're going to pick up that sort of thing with the wind. With the current, we want to make sure we know if there's any current and what it's doing. So one way we can find this out is look at something that's in the water, that like a buoy, right? So we can go by this buoy and we look at if the current's coming down the race course, then this ball is going to be trying to move that way, right? Except its anchor is holding it. So we're going to kind of see that the motion in the water. We're seeing the ball being pushed this way, or maybe there's current coming up the course, and so the buoy is being pushed that way in the water, right? Or maybe it's from the side. So we want to find out if there's current, and if there is, find out which direction it's going. And we'll talk about how we can change our starting strategy depending on what the wind or the current is doing. So again, the current is something we can just go by and look real quick. The wind is often the big wind factors are often stuff that we need to use the whole day of knowledge for. Next thing we can look at is before we continue, pass on from wind, not just the direction, but also the strength, right? So depending on what location we're in, we might have wind that's nice and constant, and it's the same, wind speed all over the course. But there might be places where maybe there's kind of, there's a dead patch over here, so we don't want to go over here. Maybe this is right under the land, and so we don't want to go way out on the left side of the course or something like that. So that's, again, it's stuff that we can definitely, we will get that information just from sailing previous races and from watching our teammates sail other races as well. But also we can kind of start to see that just sitting around looking at the course before we go, right? So we know how to tell where there is more wind or less wind or no wind just by seeing how the water looks different. If it's flat, no wind there. If it's little ripples, there's more wind than if it's flat. And then the bigger the ripples, the more wind. So if you look somewhere and there's small ripples, and then on the right side there's big dark patches, then it's going to be more wind over there. So just looking up the course can tell us a lot too. And then of course, if we have been racing previously, then we've already been on the race course. Like, oh, definitely was wind stronger over here. So figuring out all that stuff, we want to take information forward with us throughout the day. But next, so on to continuing on, just sitting here on the starting line. Another thing I want to check is there a bias in the line? So that means is one end more favored than the other? Is it further upwind? So the race committee, when they're putting out all these buoys, they're trying to make it as square as level, as even as possible. But everybody makes a small mistake, or maybe the wind has changed a little bit, or a lot of things could have happened, and maybe we have one of our ends of our line is farther upwind than the other end. And so we've got the flag here, we've got the buoy here. If it were set like this, then we can tell that if a boat starts right here, a sailboat starts right at the boat end of the line, and another sailboat starts at the pin end of the line, we can see that both of these boats are following the rules. They're starting behind the line, but this yellow boat is already a little further ahead towards the windward mark, way up somewhere up there, than this blue boat is. And it's not going to be a big gain, right? This is not even a whole boat length, but it is a little bit of a gain. And so if we're able to be over near this end of the line, we know that we're going to be starting with a little bit of an advantage over the people that are starting over at this end of the line. So how can we tell if this is happening, right? Because we don't have this nice, lovely overhead view when we're on the race course. So there's a couple different things we can do. One is we can go to about the middle of the line and we point our boat straight up in the wind. And remember, we've talked previously, normally we don't want to do this because now we're kind of stuck and we're going to drift down and we're not sure where we're going to come out. But just for this once here, we can do that. And we're going to point directly at the wind. And then we're just going to we're going to be looking forward at our boat, and we look to one side, looks to the other. Sometimes I'll even just, put both my arms out perfectly to the side. And then we're going to see, is one of these marks further ahead than the other one is, right? And so we can tell in this view, we've got our little sailor sitting right here. He's got his head right on the side of the boat. and he can tell that this mark is going to be further ahead, further toward the front of his boat than this flag. So now he knows that this buoy is further upwind. The other way we can do, and this helps us with another thing that we will get into in just a second, is that you can also sail upwind for a bit, right? So we'll sail upwind, close hauled on this tack, close hauled on this tack, and now we're looking for what sort of angle is our boat compared to the start line. So we can tell right here, these boats are even. The winds, they're starboard tack, port tack, but they're the same distance away from the wind, right? But when we've got boat number 1 here, they can tell that when they're looking at this, where they're kind of looking between these two buoys, they can tell their angle down to the line is not as big as when they're at boat 2. This angle here is a bit bigger, right? So if we realize we're sailing upwind and we have to head down a whole lot to be pointed at the line, or we're sailing upwind and we only have to head down a little bit to be pointed at the line, that'll tell us kind of the same thing, right? This buoy is further upwind. So there's one more thing that doing this sail upwind for a little bit, and we're not gonna sail the whole course. We'll go just a little ways on starboard, little ways on port, and maybe we even just go on starboard and then come back down and start from the same spot and sail on port, so we get that good comparison. So we're not going to try to sail the whole race course in 3 minutes because we know that won't work out. So the other thing we can find out when we're doing this is we can find out if the wind is at a different angle than perfectly square down the course, right? So if I were, let's see, how much of the screen can we see? We can move down quite a bit. Perfect. So we'll move down a little bit to make our course a little better aspect ratio, whatever the phrase is for that. So our start line here, still the orange boat and orange pin, but now we can put our windward mark up here, right? So again, we're always trying to, when we set race courses, we always want to make them nice and even, but we will make little mistakes. Maybe the wind changes a little bit throughout the day as well. And so we will often end up with not only one of these starting marks in a little bit the wrong place, so that maybe we've got a little bit of a bias on the line, but also probably this windward mark isn't perfectly upwind of the exact center of the line. It may be off to the side a bit, right? So when I do this, it looks like surely we'd be able to tell that, right? That's because my race course is very short. Mostly my race courses, my windward mark is going to be like way up at the ceiling. And so once you get to that kind of distance, it's harder to tell your good angles. So we will often end up with the windward mark being off to one side or the other. It's not perfectly straight up wind, right? Or maybe we've set the whole course up so that these 3 marks relative to each other are perfect, but the wind is actually what's at an angle, right? So, or we could say that the wind is at the top of the screen and I've kind of shifted my whole course, right? So for whatever reason, the windward mark is not perfectly upwind of the starting line. And the way we can tell that is by sailing upwind right off this line here. So if I were to take this angle, can we see? Yeah, we can see that. Here's my wind, it's at some angle. So if I were to line up the boats, there we go, that looks about right. The boats are always relative to the wind because that's what sailboats care about. So this is, I'm close hauled on starboard tack, close hauled on port tack. But I can definitely tell here that one of these boats is pointed much closer to the windward mark than the other one is. So we can all obviously see that number 2 is going very close to the mark, while number 1, when they go the same distance, they're much farther away from that mark, right? Most of the time, our wind shifts are not quite this big, and our mark is a lot farther away, so the effect isn't quite that big, but this illustrates exactly what's happening very well. So when we sail upwind, we can help ourselves to find this, whether there's a bias in the line, if one of these marks is higher or lower than the other. It also helps us find if our course is a little bit offset to the wind, right? Or maybe we have the wind is normal, it's set up correctly for the start line, but we do have a buoy, the windward mark is off to one side. So again, we'll do our little sail upwind a little bit on starboard, a little bit on port, and which one points us closer to the mark. So again, looking at the same thing, right? So this guy, he's definitely sailing a little further away from that buoy than this guy is. If they sail the same distance, looks like number 2 right now is closer to that mark than number 1 is. So it's another thing we can find out. Another way, if we don't have time, maybe we were doing other things, or you know, we had to bail a lot of water out or something between 2 races, and so we don't have a lot of time that we can go and sail upwind a little bit on starboard and then come back and sail upwind a little bit on port. And we do have to just deal with, you know, finding something out from the line. So to figure out which side of the course this buoy is moved to, if it's off to the left a little or if it's off to the right, we'll find that out by, again, putting our boat right up in the middle of the line. And so we can do 2 things at once. We'll find out if one of these buoys is favored. We also find out which side of the boat is which side of the course is the windward mark on. So when we point our boat straight up at the wind, right now we can see that this buoy is off our port side, our left side. It's not dead upwind, it's off on the left side of our boat. So we're going to use that information to figure out what's the favored tack, right? So whether it's the windward mark that's offset or if it's the wind that's somehow offset, the favored tack is the one that you can sail on for longer. Oh, and Reed is waiting to get in. Let's let Reed get in here. There we go. Yeah, I tried to take off that waiting room now that there's a password on there, and it wouldn't let me do it. So, hey there, Reed. Oh, still connecting to audio. Yeah, sorry for however long you've been waiting there. But cool, we're in now. So we're continuing talking about start sequences today. So we're talking right now about how we can find the favored tack. So we're just defining right now what the favored tack is. It's basically whichever tack we're going to sail on longer. So again, in a perfect world, we're going to set up our race course so that we sail on each tack the same amount of time. So we're sailing starboard, maybe we go for 20 seconds and then on port for 20 seconds, and then we're right up at the windward mark. It's going to be a lot longer than that, right? Because our races, we want them to be 20 minutes long. But that's the idea, is that we sail the same amount of time on port as on starboard, so everything's balanced. But like we said, we are not in a perfect world. We can't get that race course set up absolutely down to the millimeter. And so there's usually going to be what we call favored tack, which is whichever tack we sail on for longer. So in this case that we talked about earlier, where our windward mark is off to one side, sailing on starboard is going to get us a lot closer in the same amount of time as sailing on port, right? So we've gone the same distance from the start line, but now this guy is this far from the mark, which is like twice as close as the guy who went on port. So that means starboard is the favored tack. And again, this is a really squished down race course. Usually it's not going to be quite as obvious. So we have to do those little things and find find is the mark off to the left or off to the right, or is the wind off to the left? Is it off to the right? So finding that out, doing those things, that's something we can definitely fit into that 3 minutes of time, right? So we want to set ourselves up so that we can take that favored tack first. We won't go into exactly why that is right now. We'd have a lot more of talking to do. But we want to get on the favored tack first. So if the mark's off to the left, that means starboard is the favored tack. We want to be able to be on starboard at the start, which is easy because starboard has right away. Everybody starts on starboard, right? So we're going to get starboard and sail close to the mark, and then we'll have to do a little short port tack. But we always want to take that long tack first. If mark's off to the right, now we know the port tack is favored. So we want to try to set ourselves up in a spot where we can get onto port quickly after the start and then sail that long port tack, and then we'll come back on starboard later. So maybe that means that we're wanting to set ourselves up near the boat, right? Near the right side of the line, because that gives us more chance of not having a lot of people here in our way. We can tack onto port, sail that long port tack, and then be close to the mark. right? So always trying to set up so that we can get on the favored tack first, and we have to balance it with other things, right? So maybe port tack's the favorite tack, but this is the pin is favored, and so then we kind of have to balance. How important is it to be a little bit further ahead on the start line at the start compared to getting right onto that favored tack. The favored tack is probably going to be it's the bigger factor, right? Sailing upwind is a lot more time than just this little half a boat length or 1 boat length gain that we can get by being near the high side of the line. So if we had to choose between those two, I'd probably go with favored tack because I'm going to be sailing upwind for a lot longer than I just sit at the start line. So a lot of different things to think through there. But those are 2 things we want to check, right? We want to check, is there a bias to the line? Is there a bias to the windward mark? What's next? So after that, now we want to be thinking about where we need to go and set ourselves up, right? So we are getting our information. We're figuring out what is the course like. And we definitely want to be doing those things every time for every start, because moving a buoy is something that happens often, right? It's very rare that the buoys are going to be in place all day. So we can't just look at it in the morning and say, all right, I know it's, the pin is favored, because probably the race committee will notice that too after a couple races and they'll fix it. And then if you keep thinking the pin is favored, but it's not, that's not going to work well for you. So I want to be checking out every race. So that'll take up some time out of our 3 minutes. But now, as we're getting down to maybe 1:30 or a minute to go, now is when we want to be finding our spot. So we've got some information, we've decided where we want to go. Now we need to get there, right? So we talked, I think a couple weeks ago, about how to make our boat sit still, how to luff on a starting line, right? We got to go a little bit above close hauled and keep our mainsail not flapping, but not completely trimmed in for power, right? And our jib is luffing. We are letting the jib luff, so we're just sitting still. So we don't have to describe all that again. We've gone through it. We can go back and watch the video if we need to. But we're going to come in. We're going to be doing that, right? So at about a minute to go is at least about that point, we've got to be starting to move ourselves in. So if we know that we want to be, maybe the pin is favored, we'll say. So we know that we want to be over here. So we'll redraw our actual line that we have. So here's our little race committee flag. There we go. So we know that we want to be getting over here, right? So at 1 minute to go until the start, we don't want to be here. And why is that? Because boats can't sit perfectly still, right? So we're going to be drifting along. So even when we try to stop ourselves completely, we won't be moving forward, but we are moving kind of like this, very slowly, right? So if we decide we're going to sit at the pin and we go here with a minute, we're going to have drifted over here by the time it's time for the start. And then there's all these other boats behind us, so we can't really get back to where we wanted to be. So what we have to do is set up a little bit behind or farther to the right of where we want to be if we're sitting on starboard, which we should be for that start sequence, because starboard has right of way over port. So if you set up like this, boat 2 is never going to be in a good spot because there's always going to be a starboard boat coming in. Anyway, so when we decide we want to be right at the pin, we're going to set up over here, right? And we're going to let ourselves slowly drift along. And anybody who does come up under here, he's like, oh, I got you now. But then he'll realize, oh, I am drifting down. And so he's not going to have, he's going to run out of room. So it's one of those things that I can't tell you here exactly how to eyeball, how much time, how much space you need for the time you have. It's something that we can only really learn by doing it. But we at least know that's what has to happen. So next time we're out sailing or next time we're practicing starts, we'll get out and work on that, right? So that's when we're setting up, we're making sure that we're leaving room to drift down to where we want to be. By the time we get to our 30 seconds and 20 seconds and 10 seconds, we're still should have that little bit of room to keep drifting, right? Distance getting smaller and smaller. Now, as we get to the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now is when we start to accelerate, right? So that could be the topic of a whole nother video. So we won't go into how that all works. But we want to make sure that we've left ourselves not just enough room to get right to it, but also to start moving, right? Because that's also going to make us move down that direction much quicker. So make sure that we're able to get moving and roll up over there. And that's kind of that's our run through of what needs to happen, right? So we're spending the first part of our start sequence, and any time that we have before, we're gathering information. We're looking at the wind, we're looking at the current, we're looking at the race course. What are the buoys like? Are they in the right spot where they should be, or are they a little bit off? And if they're a little bit off, how can I use them to my advantage? How do I get on that? How do I find that favored tack? And so we're gathering all that information. Then in the last part of the starting sequence, the second half, if you will, now we're figuring out, we're using that information to decide where am I going to sit on the line. And we're going to get ourselves to that spot, or put ourselves in a position where we're going to be at that spot right when we want to be, right when the starting whistle goes.